I was a mental health therapist in a previous chapter of my life before I had my son. As the stereotype goes, men who sought services usually did not remain engaged for very long and eventually stopped attending. What was it for you that made you stop going? I was recently listening to a podcast where a representative from the American Institute for Boys and Men discussed how traditional therapy is not designed for how men connect. Therapy is usually face-to-face, with talking as the primary activity. However, men traditionally connect more when engaged in a shared interest, such as working on a car or playing video games and sitting side by side. This insight was eye-opening and made a lot of sense. Now that I have a son, I have taken a strong interest in the unique needs of boys and young men and what they require to become adult men who feel fulfilled in their lives and find value in themselves. Story 1. When I was married, my wife was very abusive both physically and mentally. I went to therapy and had about 6 sessions with a counselor. I thought it was going well and started opening up about how my wife choked me numerous times while I was sleeping. She asked what I did to make her do that, and I said that if I were a woman finally opening up about my husband choking me in my sleep, there is no way she would respond that way. I gave up after that and tried therapy with a man who specialized in spousal abuse. It was a bit better, but the constant question of, how did it make you feel, got very annoying very fast. I don't need to be humored. Story 2. Absolutely terrible. I have almost completely lost faith in therapy after how it went for me repeatedly. There is one therapist and only one I would reconsider, but unfortunately his clinic does not take my insurance. Anyone else, and you could not get me to go back even with a gun to my head. I went for sexual assault, if that means anything with how bad it went. Story 3. I am not one of those people who believe everyone needs to be in therapy, but it was helpful for me when I was struggling with depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Therapy is not a magic wand to make everything in your life better, but it taught me some coping strategies to move on with my life. Story 4. After switching therapists, it went great for about a year until we both felt it was no longer needed. The original focus was due to work stress and incompatibility, but it ended up addressing major life choices I needed to make in my personal life. I had to be extremely open, put in the work, and genuinely collaborate with him, which I think many people struggle to do. That meant accounting for things I had not disclosed, not even to myself, sometimes during sessions and sometimes in between. I can absolutely recommend this approach, but you should also find one that works for you. Mine was more of a conversation and discussion than me simply expressing feelings, as it was with my first therapist, which did not work. Story 5. I found a woman therapist who was a psychiatrist but mostly did therapy. She was excellent, but unavailable and expensive. I liked her a lot. She was very intelligent and helpful. I stopped going because my problems eventually diminished, in part due to her therapy. I felt like I was paying a lot of money just for conversation, as the sessions no longer focused on specific strategies for my issues, which was the case in the first several sessions. I miss her though. In case anyone is wondering, there was absolutely no physical or romantic attraction. I perhaps started to feel like she was a good friend. Story 6. I have probably spent at least a decade in therapy in my 54 years. It has been good. It is good to have someone to talk to about things who has experience and no agenda but my well-being. Story 7. Therapy is not designed to engage men. It focuses too much on emotions and not enough on identifying the cause of a problem and solving it. I dislike therapy, and after seeing several therapists, I felt that the issues I was trying to address were dismissed. There was no structure. For example, what is the issue? Issue X. Here is how you address issue X and how you can solve it. Men are rarely encouraged to acknowledge their emotions or feelings, so we do not engage in that manner very well. Story 8. It was terrible, but I persisted because I was in a bad place for too long. Eventually, I found a therapist who seemed helpful, but my insurance did not cover it. Thankfully, I got a new job and kept my expenses tight for a while. After a couple of years, I was practically a different person and had learned so much about myself. Honestly, it saved my life. Things are not perfect, but definitely better. Story 9. It is completely true that we find it easier to connect when we are not face-to-face and are doing physical activities. Story 10. I found it immensely helpful. Just talking about things helped me gain so much clarity. I encourage people to go if I think they could benefit from it. I stopped going when I thought I had reached a good checkpoint and had a few tools in the toolbox. I would like to keep going, but it is expensive. Story 11. I have seen about 6 different therapists in my lifetime. All have gone about the same way. I feel this way. Oh, don't feel that way. In relationships, I feel this way, and I always feel compelled to X. Next time you feel compelled to X, don't. I've noticed a pattern in myself I really don't like. I seem to have intrusive thoughts about why a lot. I fear it makes me unlovable or incapable of loving fully. I suggest going on more dates. Knowing you have this feeling and choosing not to listen to it. The whole notion of you just have to find the right therapist. Keep looking until you find a good one is frustrating. Therapy is expensive, which wouldn't be a problem if these qualified professionals were actually helpful. Very few careers allow someone to be unhelpful and still get clients. What helped me was doing my own research, finding a modality that suited me, and having a therapist I can bounce ideas off even though I do 80% of the work. I understand doctors can use a computer to search for symptoms that therapists cannot. But it seems like none of the professionals I met understood complex post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma, or how early childhood affects us as adults at all. Men are problem solvers. We want to get to the root of the issue and understand why we are who we are. Many therapists don't offer that. I think a mistake I made was seeing mostly female therapists, which does not mean they are less qualified. It's just that when it comes to how we think, maybe men really do understand men better. The softer, feminine advice I thought I wanted wasn't actually what I needed. With that last point in mind, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's book, How Emotions Are Made, truly opened my eyes to many things. Considering your needs, yes, that might be important, but many men are also pretty introverted. It may not be much help for him at a young age, but there are men's groups that I'm interested in. They are safe spaces for men to talk about things. Each week, there is a host who creates a talking point. I'm sure you'll do great either way. I wouldn't equate playing video games with activities like fixing a car or other achievable goals you work toward. Sitting at home and playing video games online can often lead to poor mental health since it is a weak substitute for socializing. Story 12. It never helped. The first experience was possibly even traumatic. I kept wondering when the therapy was going to start. I continued seeing more therapists because that is what everyone says to do. Some were not as bad, but none helped. The last one I saw, my 8th or 9th therapist, rejected me because she said my issues were too severe for her and that I needed someone else. Story 13. Not the best, but I am absolutely serious in my pursuit of bettering myself for my family as we speak. I'll be staying long-term for myself. Last year, I committed to therapy at a clinic. My main therapist specialized in complex post-traumatic stress disorder and interpersonal relationships. Between sessions, I attended weekly group therapy for coping skills and stress control. Then I did peer leader one-on-one sessions, but it felt like casual socializing at a coffee house. It was a $35 coffee talk that didn't help. I left after my therapist left because all she really did was print off sheets from the internet. I was paying $60 a month for this. I left after 3 months because she said it seemed like I could do my program at home, probably because of Google. Needless to say, I still have deep issues, and homebrew therapy didn't work out. Unfortunately, I'm still struggling, and it's damaging everything important to me. I feel stuck in self-preservation mode, and it's keeping me from fully serving my family. New sessions for a more targeted issue start in 2 weeks. I specifically asked if they had the proper dialectical behavior therapy program to know if it would be worth going to their office again. Currently, I've been spending more time with a married friend who's inspiring me to really think about what I should be doing for myself to better provide for my family. It's a big difference from having single friends with no family responsibilities or people that rely on them. He's also a leader in a group that celebrates recovery and trauma therapy and has a men's group. It's through a church, but it's not religious. They start a new group in the fall, and I think I'll be joining. Having other men to give perspective, offer advice, and relate to the rules we should follow to be good, safe, positive, providing, and mentally strong influences for our families would be a boost. Story 14. Male from Sweden. Only great experiences, to be honest. Had several sessions with 4 to 5 different therapists over my lifetime, mostly through work, and they have all been good but also different. No nonsense, science-based, and exactly what I needed then and there. Story 15. I focus on objectives and results. I do not rely on personal traumatic stories or simply say, "I'm sorry that happened to you," as that is unhelpful. I am still trying, but now for more calculated and specific reasons. Story 16. Find a male therapist. I am a psychiatrist, and my male patients have mentioned that they have had a better experience with a male therapist. Story 17. Therapy is expensive, and searching for a therapist until you find one you connect with is costly and not worth the money until you find the right match. That is my barrier to entry. Story 18. I started going to therapy in 2022. My therapist and I work well together, partly because I am open-minded and communicate openly. I also type down her suggestions and try them out. Around September 2023, I stopped going as much. I finally found comfort for a medical issue I had been experiencing for 2 years, and it changed everything. I also moved out of a horrible living situation. At some point, I felt I did not need more help and just had to apply what I had learned and work on myself. I went recently to get some perspective on my work stress. Story 19. I dislike this narrative because it falls apart with just a few seconds of thought. Women have traditionally bonded over activities as well, such as knitting circles or foraging for berries. Men have traditionally bonded through conversation without activities, like at the neighborhood bar. This distinction is unnecessary. The reality is that men have been conditioned by society to believe that expressing emotions is bad, which is why they often struggle with therapy. I am a man and participated in talk therapy for several years. It helped me greatly. My therapist literally saved my life. Many studies have shown that cognitive behavioral therapy works effectively across all genders. I do not agree with the idea that men need activities to bond and therefore cannot do therapy. That is false. Story 20. For me, I never felt a therapist was assertive enough. You come with a problem that you only want to share with a rational stranger, and they want to create a welcoming space where sharing your feelings is okay. This sounds great in theory, but let's be real. I am here for a problem that isn't easy to speak about, so be direct and ask me about it. Story 21. It really helped me. I preferred having a female therapist. I started going after I quit drinking, and it helped me become more comfortable with being vulnerable. I stopped because I reached a place where I was happy with my mindset. Story 22. I am a 35-year-old male who has been a mental health patient for 14 years. If we include my insistence on family counseling at age 16, it all started 19 years ago. I think individual results vary. I kept being diagnosed for individual symptoms, and it wasn't until my wife advocated for me and did her own research that I received the correct diagnosis, a medication change, and now I am progressing well in my mental health journey. For the longest time, I was diagnosed with persistent depressive mood disorder with anxious distress and generalized anxiety disorder, otherwise unspecified. Then I was diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. That diagnosis was difficult to accept. This all occurred between ages 21 and 22 when I was still in the Army. I served a 4-year contract, left the military, and started utilizing Veterans Affairs. Healthcare. Within a year, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I underwent various therapies, including talk therapy, cognitive processing therapy, and movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. My wife and I had very little income and were eventually able to qualify for Medicaid. I started seeing an outside provider because around age 30 my wife suspected I had attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder, which I was later diagnosed with along with autism spectrum disorder. I have been on stimulant medication for about 3 years, and it has been life-changing. I am currently in a Veterans Affairs talk therapy group with a curriculum that changes every 6 months or so. That is going well, and I also attend individual talk therapy with a Veterans Affairs provider. I believe money and insurance coverage are major obstacles for most men seeking mental health care. Additionally, there is significant stigma around accessing mental health services, regardless of gender or socioeconomic status. Story 23. I stopped attending therapy because my wife at the time told me to. To be fair, my therapist was making me aware that I was in an abusive relationship and wanted me to seek help to leave my marriage. My now ex reviewed the worksheets and information I was given and said that only weak men went to therapy. They also said our family would have to skip meals if I insisted on continuing treatment. Since the divorce, I have gone back to therapy twice. I had to stop both times because affording to live alone requires more work hours and less personal time. Story 24. Went twice. It was a useless waste of time and money. Never again. I will just eat whatever is bothering me for the rest of my life. Story 25. Mostly a waste of money. It really opened my eyes to how many mental health fads like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing and meditation are just scams or cults. I know it sounds very casual, but getting into a relationship and going to the gym did 100 times more for my mental health than therapy did. The stuff that helped me the most was cognitive behavioral therapy because I probably have obsessive-compulsive disorder. But let's be real, cognitive behavioral therapy is not rocket science. You can write the main points down on a napkin, and there is no real reason to pay a therapist thousands of dollars to explain it to you, in my opinion. Story 26. For me, therapy was insightful and I enjoyed it. The reason I stopped going was that my therapist moved to a new location that did not accept my insurance. However, I still highly advocate for therapy and agree to some extent that it may not connect with everyone, and some may find other ways to cope with their battles. I do believe it helped me understand some of the reasons behind my feelings. Therapy is one of those experiences that is what you make of it, and it is all about finding the right therapist. Story 27. I have attended a single one-on-one therapy session, technically counseling, and once went to a single couples therapy session. The one-on-one session was after I was stuck in a depressive rut, dealing with a bad breakup. It was overall helpful and allowed me to express my feelings and cry. We even hugged. I felt better afterwards. The couples therapy session was beneficial as well. It helped when my partner and I were having problems in our relationship. It allowed us to discuss our issues with a neutral third party who acted as a logical mediator, helping to find common ground. We are still together several years later, so I would say it worked well. Story 28. I agree with the idea that many men are more comfortable communicating side by side. I realized that in my mid-30s, and I expressed that I prefer working on a project with a friend rather than just hanging out. I thought it was because I don't care to drink, which seems to be how most people socialize. I didn't consider applying this to therapy though. My ex-fiancée broke up with me when I was 47, and it was a difficult breakup for me. I had never seen a therapist before, but I was struggling and looking for help. I saw 5 different therapists over about a year, including a somatic hands-on counselor. One of the talk therapists was somewhat helpful during a particular session, and the somatic counselor made an impression. However, it was largely a useless experience considering I spent around $6,000 of my own money, many hours, and a lot of effort. What actually helped the most was becoming very social through meetups, dance classes, pickup sports in parks, and simply going out 4 or more evenings a week. It didn't help in between, but while out, I had to put on a social face and pay attention to people outside myself. I don't plan on doing talk therapy again. It did not reduce my pain, provide new understanding, or offer practical actions to improve anything. I have decided not to pursue it. Interestingly, I have a couple of therapist friends, was a facilitator for parenting classes for 3 years in my late 30s, even though I don't have children, and have considered becoming a therapist myself because I enjoy listening and being supportive. Story 29. I've gone 3 times, but one was a long time ago, and I'm more skeptical of the actual science behind that first time. I met with 2 separate people. The first was a man and the second was a woman. The 2 appointments were about 7 years apart for separate issues. The second was for couples counseling, with multiple sessions attended with my partner. Keep in mind, I'm not a random person off the street. My bachelor's degree is in psychology. I'm familiar enough with the practice to the point that it might make my experience different. Going into the first session, I was forced to go by family. I attended about half a dozen sessions. The counselor was older and soft-spoken. We spent an hour working through issues. I never had any problems with it, although it didn't actually resolve the issue. The issue's magnitude was extremely exaggerated by the family. The second time was where things started to get uncomfortable. The only counselors available for couples in town were women, and the women I knew who wanted to enter the field weren't the best at overcoming their biases. Again, another older woman had us sit down in the office. She pointed out my body language shifting during the first meeting. I did not appreciate that at all. I would have preferred if she didn't make fun of me being uncomfortable in a room with someone I don't know and someone with whom I'm trying to save a relationship, but I was unsure if she felt the same. Luckily, it was just an intake meeting for her to get a feeling for us, but I instantly spoke much less during sessions while she communicated mostly with my partner. I wasn't feeling good about it, but wanted to be open to improvement and fix the easily fixable issues we had. During the second to last session, she reined in my girlfriend being unreasonable with me and actually seemed to help communicate my point to her. The last session was one-on-one, and she definitely had a different tone than in our group meetings after she heard the specifics of our relationship dynamic. She was a helpful person and a good experience, but hindsight shows that relationship was going downhill long before we went to counseling. I don't think she's worked with many couples where the man wasn't just going to go along with whatever was happening. The moral of the story is counseling and therapy are good tools, but I'd still prefer a male couples counselor. Story 30. It has been helpful for me in recovering from depression and a breakup, and for orienting myself in my life toward accomplishing goals that are important to me and becoming more of the person that I want to be. Story 31. Mine has been going well. I have had 2 good experiences. They help, but they are not making massive changes to me every day. It is more like adjusting the settings. Story 32. As a child with a divorced, bipolar parent, I was pushed into therapy and tuned out when the therapist began reporting back to my parent, who punished me for what I shared. That parent was also in counseling at the request of my school principal with the same service provider. I tried again during some difficult times in undergraduate studies and was treated by a student in training who asked 100 questions every session. Much later, I tried a second counselor who was the most condescending medical provider I have ever had. She made it clear that my problems were not actual problems but stemmed from a lack of gratitude and humility. After college, at the request of a family member, I went for a 4th time and had to deal with a counselor who wanted to discuss my parents' relationships, weddings, affairs, both theirs and my sex lives, and whether or not I was a virgin. The whole process felt somewhere between a joke and low-grade assault. I would rather have a 5-minute temper tantrum and then get on with my life. Story 33. Positive. Helped me address issues I did not know how to handle. It also provided tools and understanding to prevent negative behaviors. I highly recommend it. Like anything in life, you get out what you put in. Story 34. My parents forced me to go, as they were sure I was losing my mind and might need electric shocks. However, my experience has been mostly positive, contrary to popular opinion. At least I came out without any major damage. This was 15 years ago. I was going through a phase and acting out, lashing out at my parents and belittling them, so they thought I needed to be checked. The first doctor and his trainee said I had a pseudo-philosophical disorder. I was having one of those days where everything felt off, but refused to prescribe any medicine until it got worse and sent us on our way. The second doctor asked me to believe in God and said he couldn't help until I did. I'm glad I escaped these 2 unscathed. The third doctor listened to all of us calmly and diagnosed an adolescent crisis, which happens later in India because we enter the workforce much later. He said it would take some time and advised me to relax. No medication was needed. Instead, he pointed fingers at my parents and said every child is different and they should not force me to be any other way. I'm eternally thankful to that doctor, whose 8-year-old read thick encyclopedias for fun. My parents were still not convinced and sought help from the student counselor in my college. She referred us to a good hospital affiliated with the college. The doctor there said the same. It was just a phase and I needed to be left alone. Finally, the college counselor fixed a weekly appointment with me, which I attended irregularly. She counseled my mother more than me. I'm thankful to her as well. About 9 years ago, I went to the campus counselor for advice on quitting smoking. She was very helpful. I wanted to quit and worked on our plan. I quit smoking in a short time and haven't smoked since. We uncovered how smoking was linked to the worst phases of my life when I felt totally out of control, and how it gave me a sense of control. I really had to work through it, and I think it was a good thing. Many men I know aren't willing to explore how their patterns formed, so therapy is a lost cause for them. To answer your question, pay close attention to the kind of person your son is, how he deals with his emotions and his tendencies. We men are not all alike. Therapy does work for some of us. Story 35. Just keep trying therapists until you find one that works. There are many who are not effective. Imagine if this was the standard for dentistry. Story 36. I find it useful and enjoyable. I have a male therapist who is not far from me in age, and he works with people from many different backgrounds. Having someone I can genuinely talk to and know that it stays personal and private is reassuring because I cannot always bring up those issues with friends or family. I have done therapy many times in my life, and it felt like the one place where I was allowed to speak instead of being constantly told I was disruptive, talked too much, or was disrespectful. When no one wants to hear your voice, therapy is a place to be heard. If it helps, I do therapy online over video chats on my phone, and they do not mind if I make coffee or grab a snack while talking if I feel the need to be busy. Story 37. If you find the right therapist, it can be great. My first 3 therapists were all terrible, and none of them lasted longer than a few weeks. I have been seeing my current therapist for about a year, and she is great. I feel comfortable opening up to her about anything. She is not judgmental and gives solid advice and encouragement. Story 38. It did not help. I was asked questions I had already asked myself 1,000 times, then made to explain them again. Nothing they said had real-world application for me. It was all words: be better, work on yourself, focus on the positive. That has zero meaning. I could get the same platitudes from a motivational poster. It is expensive. It forces me to confront issues I do not want to confront. If you do couples counseling as a female, when the man responds, do not just acknowledge that he has spoken, respond directly to what he is saying. I lose trust in therapists for many reasons, some of which are not relevant to me. Trust is fragile, and neither party can really anticipate how the other will react. That is an interesting thought about men being more receptive to therapy during a shared activity. I had not thought of that. I think you are right, though. When someone directly confronts me, even if I am wrong, defense mechanisms trigger. I feel threatened and my walls come up. If we are painting a picture, walking in the woods, or sculpting clay, I would likely be far more relaxed and able to speak openly. Story 39. I went to commit suicide in November 2022 due to job-related stress. Something stopped me. I immediately sought someone to talk to the next day. It's been almost 3 years, and I have changed so much in my life. Things are mostly great thanks to the help from my therapist. He's a great person and shares many of the same interests as I do. I still see him once a week to stay connected. Most weeks, we just talk casually for an hour. Sometimes I have issues to address, but since I left the job that was seriously affecting my well-being, things have been generally great. I believe he played a big part in that. I work in the construction industry and speak publicly about my experience with mental health. My goal is to raise awareness of the issue and encourage others to seek help before making a permanent decision to cope with what is often a temporary problem. I have become my company's mental health ambassador, and we have started ensuring that our people are supported at all times. If you are a man reading this and feeling uncertain, give it a try. It made a huge difference for me, and if you don't think the person you're seeing is right for you, just find someone else. Story 40. Hey, I am 46 and I have been to therapy twice. The first time was in my early teens after I got in some trouble. The judge realized something was wrong and sent me to therapy. It actually helped a lot. The second time was after my fiancée and best friend of almost 20 years passed away. Her death really affected me, and I needed to talk to someone to get my mind back in a better place. Both times, my therapists were women, and both experiences were really positive. I know that is not everyone's experience. I grew up in a household where my parents encouraged my 2 younger brothers and me to always speak our minds and express ourselves. I do not hear that often coming from other men. Personally, I think that made the biggest difference in my life in being able to express myself and feeling comfortable doing it. Story 41. It has been good for me to challenge thought processes that lead nowhere. It is also good to have a shame-free space and to evaluate some of the past. Therapy is not for everyone, but if you are afraid of your own mind, you will be stuck on a path to self-destruction. Story 42. I have tried many different therapies over the years. I have found that using psychedelics in the woods once or twice a year with intention is far more successful than any other therapeutic method I have tried. Ketamine therapy for depression also works well. Story 43. I have had 3 therapists. The only one who was helpful was a male therapist who was interested in working with me to fix my problems. The other 2 were female therapists and were like a brick wall, frankly. They would silently write things down but never offer advice. Men and women deal with problems differently. Story 44. I don't do therapy but work with a mental health coach. It helped me a lot. I was just lost in life looking for someone to help me get on the right track. In my opinion, you really need to find someone who understands you. It seems from what I have read that many therapists do not understand men and our issues since it is a very female-dominated profession. Story 45. I only had 2 mental health service experiences in my life. One, in the 1980s when I was a child, my mother was in therapy, and she asked if I would speak separately with her therapist so he could gain perspective on me to support her therapy. In this scenario, I was essentially background information she wanted the therapist to understand. 2. Telehealth sessions lasting 40 minutes each, 6 times total, as approved by insurance. Story 46. Not great. I appreciated that most of the therapists I saw were well-intentioned, but I gained almost nothing of value. There were no breakthroughs. I never had an aha moment. The advice was generic and not novel. I don't feel it helped me improve as a person or with my anxiety. What did help were medications and physical activity. Eventually, I went on selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors and took up hobbies that were more physical in nature. Story 47. It was life-changing. I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which explained so much in my life. It can be hard because you have to be willing to talk about difficult things and accept some hard truths. Story 48. Required by my work after a critical incident. Did not do anything useful. Did not need it. You would think after a decade as both a volunteer and full-time firefighter such procedures would not be necessary after a mass casualty incident. Poor administration. I was just thinking, well, that was difficult. Time to go home and eat a steak. Story 49. They were all very nice but talked in circles. There was too much commitment to social constructionism and left-wing ideology. Story 50. In hindsight, the answer I needed was simple. She is narcissistic and constantly gaslighting you, turning you into an anxious wreck. You should leave. I don't know if others are willing or allowed to say things like that. I'm sure if they wanted to, they could lead a person to that conclusion without stating it directly. Mine seemed to be exploiting the Medicare system with repeated sessions, and all I really took from any of it was to be more mindful. Anyway, I left that relationship and about 90% of my mental complaints disappeared, so I didn't need to continue. That experience left me feeling like the whole idea of it is somewhat of a sham. I'm not saying it is or isn't, just how it felt for me. Story 51. It was fine. I went to a therapist when I was 19, somewhat for anxiety. I don't think I was ever clinically diagnosed. I saw this one therapist for 2 years. I loved our sessions, to the point that he had to remind me this wasn't a real relationship like friends. We were just client and therapist. I eventually stopped going and was doing fine. Most recently, I had to get a mental health sign-off because I had been in therapy at one point in my life. In my first session, she concluded that I was mentally sound for the sign-off, but I kept going to her in preparation for the event that I might need the mental health check. Again, very helpful in my opinion. When I was getting my degree, I was trying to figure out what kind of career I wanted. I tried teaching because I thought that was my calling. I don't like a whole classroom of kids, but I did great one-on-one or in small groups. I remembered my first therapist and thought, maybe I should be a therapist, and that is where I am now. Story 52. Helpful to me to a point. I have had to go through a few therapists because of insurance and the special aspects of my therapy, dealing with autism, preferences, and other issues. There was one therapist I honestly wish I could go back to. My current therapist is okay, but I feel progress is slowing because I am discovering key issues. Since I am not overly anxious, they seem to be dismissed more. I am also one of the main people to say that while therapy works, your mileage may vary. Story 53. It's like they are constantly checking to see if you're a criminal rather than helping you or giving you a diagnosis after thousands of dollars spent. Having said this, I would say therapy is needed after a loss of life and to help fix bad habits. But remember, it's not a cure-all. Like medicine for a cold, you still have to sweat it out on your own and have soup. Story 54. Great for me. I recommend seeing a male therapist close to your age. Feels much more like talking to a friend. Story 55. It helped me with a number of issues, but I would not describe myself as a typical male. I am happy to have difficult conversations. I like psychology and philosophy, and I was raised mostly by women, so talking was not the issue for me. I originally sought help for depression, then for divorce, and later for depression again. It has been a rough 10 years. I am currently deciding if I need to see another therapist because sometimes it is the right tool for the job. The current therapist helped me with specific issues, but maybe I have moved on. I need to discuss other things, and it may be best to do this with a new person who has fresh perspectives on both my situation and me as a whole. Story 56. It's really helpful, but it's hard to get in and hard to find someone you can open up to at least partially. A lot of therapists I went to didn't have any background in addiction or being in close proximity to death, so it felt meaningless. The therapist I got the most from by far was previously a soldier for another country. She had a difficult experience and had to pull herself through some real challenges. Her sharing what she went through made me feel more comfortable about sharing things. It was nice finding someone who understood. I've been to many therapists in my life and she was great. She suggested I look into trauma therapy. Story 57. I have had success with therapy as someone with an under-researched case. I stopped going because I felt better, to be honest. Story 58. For me, it has been a mixed experience. I have had therapists who were not a good match, a couple of experiences that were terrible because I was completely shut off and not ready for therapy, and some therapists where we were a good match and made real progress. When talking to male friends, I have had some of my most personal conversations while we were walking home from work and the subject came up naturally. Story 59. Therapist 1. I needed someone to hear me out so I could take some sort of action. She listened but had nothing helpful to say. I don't think she could relate to my situation, so I did not go back. Therapist 2. Before my appointment, I filled out the questionnaire provided to me. I unloaded about many things, which strangely was not well received. I thought it would help them understand what they were dealing with. I was offered ketamine treatment, which seemed effective intravenously, but my insurance only covered the nasal administration. That route was not as effective. I stopped going after a few sessions since that's all they wanted to do. I found out later they catered towards young people and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals, which made more sense because they did not seem interested in what this middle-aged straight man had to say. Because of those experiences, I have not had much faith in finding another therapist that might help me. It has been about a year, and talking about it like this makes me consider giving it another try somewhere else. Story 60. The hard part is finding a therapist that fits your style well. I had a really good therapist who was easy to talk to. It didn't feel like she was analyzing me as much as trying to understand me. I chose a woman because I feel like men often give terrible advice, and a woman's perspective is valuable and more relatable to the problems I was facing. Honestly, it was the highlight of my week. Many people say if you need someone to talk to, then reach out. But having somebody I'm not friends with, whose sole purpose is to help me, was great because I didn't want to burden my friends or have them see me differently. My job's insurance changed, so she is out of network now. I'll shop around for a new therapist and let them know what my previous one did well to gauge if we'll be a good match. I definitely recommend therapy, but finding a good fit can be tough. This is not sponsored, but I strongly recommend using ZocDoc to find a therapist. Story 61. I recommend cognitive behavioral therapy for men. It is one-third learning about the mind, one-third practical discussion of what to do next, and one-third therapy. Story 62. On our first appointment, she said I should not expect there to be solutions. During the appointment, which felt more like a job interview than an attempt to help me, she paused dramatically after I answered one of her questions and said, "What are you doing now?" I cannot even remember my response. She also made it clear that she had received funding to treat me as a research subject. At no point during the appointment did she respond as if she had understood what I said. It was as if she was watching a movie, the movie being me. After that first appointment, I was left with nothing resembling help, so I did not go back. I resolved my mental health problems by resigning from my job and becoming a self-employed gardener. I was later headhunted for a different position which was worse than the one that made me ill, but it transformed into a second job for the same company that was much better, where I still work. Story 63. I have been to a few sessions a while back, as has my friend. It worked out for him and calmed his mind, but for me, I found it a waste of time. It just felt like talking to a stranger, telling your life story, and paying them for it. I may have had a bad experience, but I prefer doing physical activities like climbing or playing team sports with friends rather than talking about my feelings to someone who does not know me and charges me for it. Story 64. My story is different, but I have been going weekly for 18 months and have not missed a session. In fact, I think my therapist has reached the limit of what she can provide for me, so I am now going once per month. If it were not for therapy, I think I would be dead. It helped me understand so much about myself and open my eyes to undiagnosed autism. Story 65. I've had 4 therapists, 2 psychiatrists, and 2 licensed clinical social workers. The psychiatrists were both pretty bad experiences. The licensed clinical social workers have both been great. I think their track gives them a more holistic approach to therapeutic practice, and they are also much more affordable on average. It was not a fast process, about 4 years with the licensed clinical social workers cumulatively, but I am doing much better now than I have been for most of my adult life. Therapy is definitely a big reason for that. Story 66. Waste of time and a significant amount of money. Made no progress in any area and was just told to come back the following weeks to continue exploring options in hopes of finding a solution. I know of far better and cheaper tools that can help me for a few $100s instead of talking with someone who gives no feedback. Story 67. He gave me videos to watch during the sessions and asked if I had any questions afterward. Story 68. Nothing but very expensive, pointless encounters. I am sure it helps some people, but I think it is a huge waste of time. Story 69. Really great, actually. I had suicidal thoughts, and that scared me a lot. I spent some time unpacking that, then explored some historical experiences to better understand myself. I did eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is basically assisted guided meditation, and we worked on fixing some trauma responses. You really have to find the right person and be radically honest with what you say once you establish trust. Story 70. Most of the time, I am relaxing with friends. We're just getting lunch or something. I tried therapy when I was going through some difficulties, and it helped moderately to talk about it, I guess. But at the end of the day, it was up to me to move forward through what I was experiencing. I didn't really feel like I needed to pay someone $200 an hour to tell me something I already know to do that. I have found ketamine to be very useful for identifying blind spots in my own behavior that are harmful to me. Story 71. I did not know what I wanted from therapy and wanted more guidance, but my therapist could not offer that. Later, I wanted to go again for therapy, maybe to a different therapist, but now it is quite a large expense for me due to mortgage, child, and stay-at-home mother-wife. Story 72. I spent a month in a psychiatric hospital. The therapy sessions were unhelpful. After that month, I was able to leave the people who abused me behind. It was entirely my own effort. I knew that I, as a person, was not the problem. The only therapy that truly helped was creating art on my own. Story 73. Good. I realized how troubled my family is and how I needed to heal, so I do not repeat the toxicity with my future children. Story 74. I don't understand the importance people place on therapy these days. You go to therapy if you have some type of trauma to deal with. Reading women's spaces, they seem to think that everyone should be in therapy and that it is some kind of wonder drug. I have no idea why people think that or why there is such emphasis on it. I went to therapy for about a year. It was somewhat interesting and helped explain why I was involved in certain behaviors, while it showed me why it did not really cure or help it. So I do not think it was particularly useful. Many women's spaces are obsessed with men going to therapy before dating them. It is really strange. How much trauma can someone pick up by their early 20s that requires therapy? I suppose some people who had awful childhoods might need it, but mostly you barely know yourself, let alone be ready for therapy. Story 75. Honestly great. I have not been in about a year, but he helped me develop a lot of clarity with some personal things. Story 76. I really enjoy it. I have been going for a few years and have developed skills to deal with emotional triggers. Coupled with a meditation practice, I find I am a kinder, more thoughtful person. Therapy is not there to solve your problems. It is there to help you figure out why you have not solved them already. Get a coach if you want tactics. Story 77. First of all, the whole man therapy, from what I've seen of it, is ludicrous. Why would I, because of my gender, be expected to talk while performing some trick like catching a ball or climbing a rock? Do women do hair and makeup with their therapists? No. Frankly, if a therapist did something like that with me, I would feel insulted and leave. I did therapy. The first therapist was okay but couldn't handle my trauma. He was also older, and it was hard for me, a Xennial, to really connect with him. My second therapist was great. He worked with a lot of men with childhood trauma, and we really worked well together. Both therapists said I was an ideal client because I honestly and bluntly got to the point about everything, including my emotions. I made it clear what my goals were and that I was willing to take responsibility and achieve them. In other words, therapy worked because of masculinity, not despite it. Why did I stop? The same reason most men quit therapy. It is not because we are toxic males or any nonsense. I quit because insurance stopped covering it. Men are a lot less likely than women to have insurance. That is the real reason men are less likely to go to a doctor or to therapy. But society would rather blame men for not seeking help, despite not being able to afford it as readily as women, than acknowledge this issue. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.